Welcome back to Quick Slants on the OU Insider YouTube channel. I'm Parker Thune alongside Jesse Crittenden as we continue to bring you coverage of Oklahoma spring football from every angle. And today we arrive at our preview of the running back room, Jesse, which is a stark contrast to the running back room that DeMarco Murray had at this time a couple of years ago when you had just had Seth McGowan and Mikey Henderson dismissed from the team. Kennedy Brooks was coming off the 2020 season that he sat out due to COVID-19 concerns. Trey Sermon was long gone via the transfer portal. Ramondre Stevenson was facing a suspension once the season began. There were a ton of questions surrounding what the Oklahoma running back room was going to look like as DeMarco Murray headed into his second season as Oklahoma's running backs coach. Now he is heading into year 4, and this room is deeper than it's ever been.
Yeah, no, it really is. And I think what's interesting about it, too, is there's a lot of young talent. That's the thing. Outside of somebody like Marcus Major, there's a ton of young guys that I think have a lot of potential that you can. And really, when you look ahead to what the fall is going to look like in the running back room, it's going to be a lot of young guys that have potential, but also have some experience on the field. You look at guys like Gavin Sawchuk and Javonte Barnes, who got that experience in the bowl game. Javonte Barnes, obviously a big role last year. So I think considering you lose Eric Gray last year, no more Kennedy Brooks, all those names you mentioned, for the running back room to have this much potential was pretty impressive.
And Eric Gray was the bell cow for Oklahoma last year, which is not really a dynamic that we're too terribly used to at the University of Oklahoma. You think about what that room has looked like over the last 2 decades, even long before DeMarco Murray got there. In fact, while DeMarco Murray was a part of it, Jesse, you had tandems or you had committees. Well, in 2021, it was a lot of Kennedy Brooks. He was the true lead back for Oklahoma, and Eric Gray stepped into his shoes and filled that void in 2022. Javonte Barnes was the second fiddle to Eric Gray, and I think he's the one that many are looking at as the natural de facto candidate to be what Gray was in 2022 for the Sooners this time around in 2023. However, I tend to think that between Barnes and Sawchuk, you're going to see more of a running back 1A and a running back 1B dynamic than an RB1, RB2.
No, I agree. And that's why, I mean, you look at the bowl game, look at the Cheez-It Bowl back in December against Florida State. That's exactly how Jeff Lebby and the OU offense attacked Florida State. It was a 1-2 punch of Javonte Barnes and Gavin Sawchuk, and they both delivered. They both had success against a really good Florida State defense. So I think, I mean, I don't know how much mystery the running back room has necessarily. I think you can pencil those two guys probably at the top of the depth chart, assuming everything kind of goes the way we expect it to. But I think there are still bigger questions in regards to, I mean, someone like Marcus Major, who I think it's easy to forget partially because he's dealt with so many injuries, but the first couple games last season, he looked like the number 2 guy, and he had success. You look at some of these incoming freshmen that are stepping into the room. So I guess that's, not to say that anything is guaranteed. There's a lot that can change, but I'm really curious to see who else maybe gets into the fold outside of, Gavin and Javonte.
Then let me ask you, what do you think it takes for Marcus Major to see the field in a substantial capacity? Because with Javonte Barnes and Gavin Sawchuk showing what they showed last season, especially in the bowl game, it's pretty clear that those are your 2 lead guys, at least at this point, as we sit here in late March when you're projecting ahead to the 2023 season.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be health, right? That's been the one thing that has really, or that's been the main thing that's hurt him since he's been at OU. And again, I mean, I mentioned last year. Go back and look at the box scores, particularly through the non-conference schedule. There was real chatter about if Marcus Major should be the number 1 running back, and then obviously Eric Gray stepped up and had the season that he did. So I mean, I do think that if he can get healthy and like sustain that health and kind of work through the summer, kind of get some of that stamina back, build some size, I do think there's room with the way Jeff Lebby runs this offense. I mean, they ran the ball a ton last year, more than they have in years. I do think there's room for somebody outside of those top 2 guys. But I think it's also hard with Marcus Major because how much can you count on him? Do the younger guys in the room Do they just deserve a look in general? What Marcus Major does bring, though, is experience on the field and a veteran presence that the room doesn't have otherwise. So I think it's really tough to say, but I think it's going to have to be health for him. That's the main thing he's going to have to focus on.
Now, looking at this tandem of incoming freshmen, Caleb Hicks and Dalen Smothers, you see some thunder, you see some lightning, right? Caleb Hicks, very, very physically developed, beefed up back, former 3-star signee out of Denton Ryan High School in his first semester on campus at Oklahoma, getting the chance to go through spring with the team. And then you have Dalen Smothers out of the state of North Carolina. And that dude is your lightning, 5'10", 176 pounds, 4-star signee, a kid that is one of the fastest and most explosive backs that went through the recruiting process with the class of 2023. So you see much of a role, if any, for those two in year one, or do you think they're at least a year away from making any sort of productive dent?
Yeah, I would probably lean towards the latter just because, again, it's rare to have a running back room where already in the spring you can kind of slot in who your number one and number two guys are going to be. Not to mention that I think the thing with running backs, and we see it as they go through college or even get to the NFL, I think the lifespan of running backs gets shorter and shorter. So I think it's hard. So I think it's unique to see OU have a running back room. I mean, probably led by two young guys that haven't been beat up, that haven't played a ton of reps. So I think that makes it interesting to see where those young guys can come in. Now, Dalen Smothers, at the February media availability, he was one of the guys I was really most impressed with. I was impressed with his mindset. I think just how insightful he was. I think if you're OU, if you're DeMarco Murray, if you're Jeff Levy, I think what you want to do, I do think that number 3 running back is something that still is going to have to get worked out. I think ideally you go through the non-conference schedule and find some times in fourth quarters where you put Caleb and you put Dalen in just to see how they look on the field, because obviously practice is different than getting them on the field. Having said that, I think even if they do find their way on the field, I think it's going to be limited and outside of a Javonte or a Gavin injury. But that's okay. Javonte and Gavin are young and have potential, and Caleb and Dalen are even younger. It's okay if they don't see the field much this year.
Yeah, I think it provides something of a sexy headline to be able to say, oh, Dalen Smothers could be Oklahoma's speed back as a true freshman in 2023. Like, that's in all likelihood not going to be the case, because what you have in Gavin Sawchuk is one of the absolute fastest players, not just running backs, but fastest players in the entire country. So between your two lead guys in Barnes and Sawchuk, you've got every tool in the toolbox in that tandem and that duo that's presumably going to carry the bulk of the load for Oklahoma out of the backfield in 2023. Now, Jesse, last thing here, as far as the quarterback run game is concerned, because that's obviously a component of backfield play as well. We all remember Dillon Gabriel getting speared by Jamoy Hodge down in Fort Worth last year, which really tanked the Sooners' season, as they ended up losing that game in blowout fashion, losing the next week to Texas in blowout fashion, and then things were never the same. As you think about what the Oklahoma quarterback room brings into this year and the addition of Jackson Arnold, having a guy that you can lean on and turn to if Dillon Gabriel were, God forbid, to suffer another injury, do you think the knowledge that you could hand the keys of the offense to Jackson Arnold and not have a substantial drop-off in terms of overall efficiency and productivity allows Jeff Levy to be a little bit more creative in how he uses Dillon Gabriel in the run game?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, because I think one thing that's got to unlock this offense, is finding a little more opportunity to use that quarterback run game. And I think it's very clear as you watch last season, particularly in conference play, that is just not something that Jeff Levy wanted to do. I don't think by preference. I think, again, because he knew the drop off in that room. And I do think that Jackson Arnold, again, he's incredibly young. But I do think he brings that kind of versatility, that kind of asset to the offense. And I also think just his addition to the room in general, not to say that the other quarterbacks in the room can't improve from last year to this year, like General Booty and Davis Bevel, but I think Jackson Arnold is going to be more ready. And I would be interested to see if he's I mean, this is probably really far-fetched and a long ways away, but I'd be curious to see if he's used in any kind of, I mean, even a one-off package or 1 or 2 plays every now and then where he is kind of leading a Wildcat style offense. But either way, to get to your question, I do think just his presence in the room gives Jeff Lebby more options. And I do think it maybe unlocks what Dillon Gabriel can be in the offense. I don't know if Dillon Gabriel is this fastest guy in the world, but I do think he showed some ability to run the ball. And I do think that is something they need to incorporate a little bit more in the offense.
Sooners haven't had 2 1,000-yard rushers in the same season since 2019. Jalen Hurts and Kennedy Brooks that year. Sawchuk and Barnes will be looking to replicate that feat this fall when the Sooners hit the field. For Jesse Crittenden, I'm Parker Thune. Thanks for joining us for this installment of Quick Slants. We got another one for you coming in a couple days, so stay tuned. Subscribe here on the OU Insider YouTube channel, and we'll keep feeding you content as OU spring football continues.